You destroyed my property. Now I'm foreclosing on your house. That's what I told Sandra Miller after she spent 3 months making my life hell over my vegetable garden. This entitled HOA board member thought she owned the entire neighborhood. She had no idea she was messing with the senior loan officer at the bank that held her mortgage. When I pulled up her file and saw those missed payments, let's just say karma served itself on a silver platter. It started on a Tuesday morning in Willowbrook Estates, one of those picture-perfect suburban developments where every lawn looks like it was trimmed with nail scissors. I'd just moved into 425 Maple Drive, a modest colonial with a decent backyard that I was excited to transform. After 22 years climbing the corporate ladder at First National Bank, I'd finally made senior loan officer, and this house represented everything I'd worked for. My name is David Richardson, and if you met me at the grocery store, you'd probably think I was just another middle-aged guy trying to figure out retirement planning. Average height, graying temples, the kind of person who blends into crowds, which is exactly how I preferred it. What you wouldn't know is that I held the financial futures of half this neighborhood in my hands. The backyard was my sanctuary project. Raised vegetable beds lined with cedar planks, heirloom tomatoes, organic herbs, even a small greenhouse I'd assembled myself. Gardening had become my therapy after my wife passed 3 years earlier. There was something healing about watching seeds become sustenance. That's when I met Sandra Miller. She appeared at my fence line like a storm cloud in a Chanel suit, clipboard clutched in her manicured hands like a weapon. Sandra was one of those women who'd clearly peaked in high school and spent the rest of her life trying to reclaim that feeling of power. Blonde highlights that cost more than most people's rent, designer everything, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "Excuse me," she called over the fence, her voice carrying that particular tone that immediately puts you on edge. "I'm Sandra Miller, head of the Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee. We need to discuss your yard situation." I looked up from where I was transplanting basil seedlings, dirt under my fingernails, completely unprepared for what was coming. "Good morning, I'm David. What seems to be the issue?" Sandra's smile tightened into something that resembled a grimace. "This vegetable garden is completely inappropriate for our community standards. Willowbrook Estates has strict guidelines about maintaining property aesthetics. These vegetables are an eyesore." I glanced back at my carefully tended beds, the neat rows of plants just beginning to flourish in the spring sunshine. "I'm sorry. I reviewed the HOA guidelines before planting. There's nothing prohibiting vegetable gardens." Her laugh was sharp and condescending. "Mr. Richardson, you clearly don't understand how things work here. We have standards to maintain, property values to protect. These vegetables make the entire neighborhood look trashy." The word trashy hung in the air like a slap. I felt my jaw tighten but kept my voice level. "Ma'am, I've followed all the documented guidelines. If there's a specific violation, I'd be happy to see it in writing." Sandra's eyes narrowed. "Oh, you'll see it in writing, trust me. And if you don't comply, we'll make your life very difficult. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. I know how to handle people who don't fit in." The first violation. Notice arrived 3 days later, citing inappropriate landscaping choices that negatively impact community aesthetics. I called the number listed, reaching Sandra's voicemail. Her recorded message was sickeningly sweet. "Hi, this is Sandra Miller, your neighborhood guardian angel. Leave a message and I'll get back to you when I have time." She never called back. The second notice came a week later. Failure to comply with architectural guidelines. This time it included a $200 fine. When I tried to attend the next HOA board meeting to dispute it, Sandra had mysteriously moved the meeting location without notifying me. That's when the real harassment began. Sandra started her campaign at dawn on a Saturday morning. I was enjoying coffee on my back deck when the sound of a leaf blower erupted from her yard. Not unusual, except she was blowing leaves directly over the fence into my vegetable garden. For 2 hours straight, when I went outside to check on my plants, I found them covered in debris, dirt, and what looked suspiciously like fertilizer pellets that definitely weren't the organic variety I used. Several of my tomato seedlings had been damaged by flying twigs. "Oh my goodness," Sandra called out when she saw me surveying the damage. "I'm so sorry. My gardener must have been careless. These things happen when you have, inappropriate plants so close to the property line." The fake concern in her voice made my skin crawl, but I documented everything with photos before cleaning up the mess. Sandra's next tactic was surveillance disguised as concern. She installed a security camera that was clearly angled to monitor my backyard, claiming it was for general neighborhood safety. Whenever I worked in my garden, she'd appear at her window with binoculars, writing notes on that ever-present clipboard. She started timing my movements, documenting when I watered, when I weeded, even when I harvested vegetables. Then came the complaint letters. Excessive water usage affecting neighborhood resources. Disturbing the peace with early morning gardening activities. Attracting pests and wildlife inappropriate for suburban environment. The most ridiculous complaint accused me of operating an illegal food production facility because I'd shared tomatoes with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen. According to Sandra, this constituted commercial agriculture in a residential zone. Each complaint came with escalating fines. $200 became $500. $500 became $1,000. When I requested documentation of the specific violations, Sandra would cite vague community standards and board discretion. The harassment reached its peak on a Thursday evening in June. I came home from work to find my garden destroyed. Every plant had been cut down to ground level. My greenhouse had been accidentally hit by a baseball from the neighbor kids, even though the nearest child lived 3 houses away. The raised beds had been doused with what I later confirmed was industrial-strength weed killer. 22 varieties of heirloom tomatoes. Gone. The herb garden my late wife had helped me plan. Gone. Months of careful nurturing and thousands of dollars in materials destroyed. Sandra was conveniently watering her flowers when I discovered the devastation. "Oh my," she said with mock surprise. "What happened to your little hobby farm? I hope you weren't planning to sell those vegetables illegally." That's when I snapped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something cold and calculating settled in. My chest. I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Sandra," I said calmly, "you've made it clear you want me gone from this neighborhood. You've harassed me for months, filed false complaints, and now someone has destroyed my property. I want you to know I'm documenting everything." Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Document all you want. David? Nobody cares. I run this neighborhood. The board listens to me. You're just some nobody who doesn't belong here." She turned to go back inside, then paused. "Oh, and expect another violation notice tomorrow. Dead plants are definitely against community standards." That night, I did what any rational person would do after having their property destroyed. I started researching Sandra Miller. What I found was fascinating. Sandra and her husband Brad lived in a $450,000 house at 438 Maple Drive, directly across from mine. They'd purchased it in 2019 with a 30-year conventional mortgage from First National Bank, my department, my approval authority. Pulled up their loan file on the secure system, expecting to see a typical suburban mortgage. What I found instead made me lean back in my chair and whistle low. Sandra and Brad were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. Not just late, but seriously delinquent. Their loan was already flagged for potential foreclosure proceedings. As the senior loan officer, these cases came across my desk for final review. But there was more. Sandra had been claiming unemployment benefits while failing to disclose her HOA board compensation and her husband's unreported consulting income. She'd also taken out a second mortgage against the house 6 months ago for what the paperwork described as home improvements, but property records showed no permits or completed work. Sandra Miller, the woman who'd spent months telling me I didn't belong in this neighborhood, was living in a house she couldn't afford, with money she might not have legally obtained. The next morning, I received that promised violation notice. This one was particularly nasty. Property maintenance failure resulting in neighborhood blight. Fine, $2,000, mandatory appearance before Architectural Review Board. Instead of getting angry, I smiled. For the first time in months, I actually smiled. I drafted a professional letter on my personal letterhead. Dear Ms. Miller, thank you for your continued correspondence regarding my property. I've carefully documented all of our interactions over the past several months, including the recent destruction of my garden and your various claims about neighborhood standards. I believe it's time we had a face-to-face conversation about community standards, property values, and what it means to be a responsible homeowner. I'd like to invite you to meet me at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss these matters in detail. You'll find me at First National Bank, 1247 Commerce Street, 3rd floor. I'm the senior loan officer. I look forward to our conversation. Sincerely, David Richardson, Senior Loan Officer, First National Bank. I hand-delivered it to her mailbox that evening, making sure to wave cheerfully when I saw her watching from her window. Sandra showed up at my office the next morning, but not in the way I'd expected. She burst through the doors at 9:45 a.m. like she was leading a military assault. Her clipboard replaced with a designer handbag that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Where is David Richardson?" she demanded of my assistant, Jenny. "I'm here to file a complaint about harassment." Jenny, who'd been briefed on the situation, smiled politely. "Mr. Richardson is expecting you, Ms. Miller. Please have a seat and he'll be right with you." Sandra remained standing, pacing in the small waiting area like a caged animal. She was muttering under her breath, something about teaching people their place and showing him who's really in charge. At exactly 10 a.m., I opened my office door. "Sandra, thank you for coming. Please come in." The look on her face when she saw me behind that massive desk, surrounded by the awards and certifications that marked 22 years of banking success, was worth documenting. Her mouth fell open, her eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd met her, Sandra Miller was speechless. "Please have a seat," I said pleasantly, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "We have quite a bit to discuss." She sank into the chair like her legs had given out, still staring at me in shock. "You're the loan officer," she whispered. "Senior loan officer," I corrected gently. "I handle all the major decisions for residential lending in this region, including, as it happens, your mortgage." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. I opened a thick file folder on my desk, Sandra's loan documents neatly arranged inside. "Let's talk about community standards, shall we? You've spent months telling me I don't belong in Willowbrook Estates. You've claimed I'm affecting property values. You've destroyed my garden and harassed me because, in your words, I don't fit in." Sandra's mouth opened and closed silently. She looked like a fish gasping for air. "But here's what's interesting," I continued, pulling out a document. "According to these records, you're 3 months behind on your mortgage payments. Your account shows a pattern of late payments going back 8 months. And yesterday, your file was flagged for foreclosure proceedings." "That's," she started, then stopped. "I can explain. I'm sure you can. But there's more." I pulled out another sheet. "You've been collecting unreported income from your HOA position, which wasn't disclosed on your loan application. Your husband's consulting work has been unreported as well. And this second mortgage you took out for home improvements. Property records show no permits, no contractor invoices, no completed work." Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. Sandra was now gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Sandra," I said, my voice still perfectly professional, "as the senior loan officer, I have the authority to make decisions about troubled mortgages. I can recommend payment plans, modifications, or foreclosure proceedings." She found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "What do you want?" I leaned back in my chair, studying her for a long moment. "What do I want? I want you to understand something fundamental about how the world works. You spent months telling me I didn't belong in your neighborhood because I grew vegetables. You destroyed my property because you thought you had power over me." Sandra nodded frantically, tears starting to form in her eyes. "But here's the reality. You've been living in a house you can't afford, in a neighborhood you can't actually maintain membership in, while harassing a man who literally holds your financial future in his hands. I opened another folder. These are the foreclosure documents. They're already prepared. All they need is my signature and approval to proceed. Sandra's tears were flowing freely now. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." "No," I said firmly. "You were trying to control people because it made you feel powerful. You enjoyed having authority over others, and you targeted me because you thought I was vulnerable." I stood up and walked around the desk, perching on the edge so I was looking down at her. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to resign from the HOA board immediately. You're going to publicly apologize for the harassment and false complaints. You're going to personally replant my garden at your own expense." Sandra nodded eagerly. "Yes, anything. I'll do anything." "And," I continued, "you're going to make arrangements to bring your mortgage current within 30 days. Full payment of all arrears plus penalties and fees. If you fail to meet any of these conditions, foreclosure proceedings will begin immediately." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "How much do I owe?" I consulted the file. "Including late fees, penalties, and accumulated interest. $14,732. The number hit her like a truck. Sandra doubled over in her chair, sobbing. "I don't have that kind of money. We've been struggling for months. Brad lost his job and hasn't found anything steady." "That sounds like a personal problem," I replied coldly. "You should have considered your financial situation before declaring war on your neighbors." Sandra managed to pull together enough money to make a significant payment by liquidating her jewelry, selling her designer handbags, and borrowing against her husband's retirement account. She didn't quite make the full amount, but she came close enough that I approved a modified payment plan. Her resignation letter to the HOA board was a masterpiece of humiliation. She cited personal circumstances and the need to focus on family priorities, while formally withdrawing all complaints against me. The new garden she paid for was actually better than my original one, with professional landscaping and an irrigation system. The public apology came in the form of a neighborhood newsletter article titled, "Learning to be a Better Neighbor." Sandra wrote about the importance of community, acceptance, and not judging people based on assumptions. She specifically mentioned how she'd misunderstood the value that diverse interests and backgrounds bring to our community. But the real satisfaction came 6 months later, when Sandra and Brad quietly put their house on the market. They couldn't afford the payments, even with the modified plan, and the stress of living across the street from me had become unbearable. The house sold to a lovely young family from Guatemala. Carlos is an engineer, Maria is a nurse, and their twin daughters are the sweetest kids you'd ever meet. They asked my permission before planting their own vegetable garden, which I thought was adorable. Sandra moved to a small apartment across town. I heard through neighborhood gossip that she works at a department store now, folding clothes and answering to a manager half her age. Brad found work at a call center. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store. She always looks away quickly, pretending not to recognize me. But I remember the look in her eyes that day in my office when she realized her victim had more power than she'd ever dreamed. About a year after Sandra moved away, I received an interesting phone call at work. It was from a lawyer representing Sandra in a potential lawsuit against the bank. Apparently, she'd convinced herself that I'd somehow acted unethically by not disclosing my position earlier. The lawyer was professional but aggressive. "Mr. Richardson, my client believes you deliberately concealed your identity to entrap her in a harassment campaign." I listened politely, then responded, "Counselor, I'd be happy to address that claim. Do you have a few minutes for me to walk through the timeline?" "Certainly. Your client began harassing me before she knew my profession. She destroyed my property before she knew my profession. She filed false complaints and imposed illegal fines before she knew my profession. At what point exactly was I required to announce my job title to someone who was already breaking the law?" There was a long pause. "Well, she feels that you used your position unfairly." "I used my position exactly as it's designed to be used. When a borrower becomes delinquent on their loan, we take appropriate action. When they commit financial fraud, we document it. When they fail to meet modified payment terms, we proceed with foreclosure. Your client received more consideration than most borrowers in her situation. Another pause. She also claims emotional distress. I couldn't help but laugh. Counselor, your client spent months emotionally distressing me. She destroyed thousands of dollars worth of my property. She filed false complaints designed to force me out of my home. And she did all of this while living in a house she couldn't afford with money she hadn't properly reported. Mr. Richardson, if your client wants to pursue this matter, I interrupted, I'd be happy to provide the court with complete documentation of her harassment campaign, including videos of her directing the destruction of my garden. I'd also be prepared to testify about the financial irregularities in her loan application and the unreported income we discovered during our review. The line went quiet for a full minute. Finally, the lawyer cleared his throat. I'll discuss this with my client and get back to you. He never called back. People ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Sandra. The honest answer is no. She didn't lose her house because I discovered her financial problems. She lost it because she couldn't afford it and had been lying about her income. I didn't destroy her life. I simply stopped enabling her to destroy other people's lives. Sandra Miller represents everything wrong with HOA culture. She confused authority with power, control with leadership, and fear with respect. She believed that her position on a volunteer board gave her the right to decide who belonged in her neighborhood, based on arbitrary standards and personal prejudices. What she didn't understand is that real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to threaten or bully or destroy other people's property to prove its existence. Real power is quiet, professional, and patient. It waits for the right moment and then acts decisively. The truth is, Sandra never stood a chance. From the moment she decided to target me, she was playing a game where I held all the cards, and she didn't even know we were playing. She thought she was dealing with just another neighbor she could push around. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who could end her financial life with a signature. My garden is beautiful now, better than it ever was before Sandra's interference. The professional landscaping she paid for created raised beds with perfect drainage. The irrigation system ensures my plants never lack for water. The new greenhouse is twice the size of the original, with automated temperature control. But the real victory isn't in the garden itself. It's in the knowledge that bullies like Sandra Miller can be stopped when they encounter someone with the tools and patience to fight back properly. She spent months trying to make me feel unwelcome in my own neighborhood. In the end, she made herself so unwelcome that she had to leave. Every summer when I harvest tomatoes from those professionally installed beds, I think about the lesson Sandra learned too late. Be careful who you choose to underestimate. You never know when your neighbor might be your judge, jury, and financial executioner all rolled into one quiet, unassuming package. The vegetables taste especially good knowing they grew from the ashes of a bully's defeated ego. Last month, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside, in handwriting I recognized, was a simple message. I'm sorry, I hope you can forgive me someday. The garden is beautiful. It was signed simply, S. I thought about that card for a long time, sitting in my kitchen overlooking the garden. Sandra had paid to rebuild. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. I don't hate her anymore, but I don't feel sorry for her either. She made choices, and choices have consequences. Did I save the card? No. Did I respond? No. Some apologies come too late, and some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt with a few words on a greeting card. But I do hope she learned something from our encounter. I hope she treats her new neighbors with respect. I hope she's found a way to feel powerful that doesn't require making other people feel powerless. And if she hasn't, well, somewhere out there is another quiet, unassuming person who might just surprise her. The garden teaches you patience after all. And sometimes, patience is the most powerful weapon of all.